What if the biggest thing holding you back isn't your strategy, but in fact, it's your mindset? My guest today helps leaders do the hard work, the work that most oftentimes we want to avoid, thinking differently so that we can lead and show up differently. His approach, it's not about quick wins, it's not about the hype, but it's about rewiring how you show up, how you decide, and how you influence others. Sometimes as leaders, even myself, we can get into mental traps. We can block our own growth. And that's why some leaders stay stuck even when everything looks amazing on paper. So this conversation, it might hit a nerve with you today, and that's the point. But if you're looking to up-level your leadership and be the best that you can be, this is one episode you do not want to miss. My name is Lena Nasserdeen. Welcome to the Rise Up For You podcast, and let's jump in today with our guest, Dr. Ryan Gottfredson. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Rise Up For You podcast. This is your host, Lena Nasserdeen. And today I am super excited to bring a longtime friend back on the podcast. Ryan, welcome so much to the show. It's such an honor to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we have a lot to talk about. You have a new book that's coming out that's all about becoming your best, obviously very much in alignment with Rise Up For You. But before we jump in, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. So I'm a leadership professor at Cal State Fullerton. If you're not familiar with Cal State Fullerton, we have the second largest business school in the United States.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's crazy. We've got over 40,000 students at the university, and over 10,000 of those are at the business school.
Okay.
So what that allows me to do is it allows me to dive really deeply into what I'm passionate about in terms of my research and teaching. And then I leverage that when I work with organizations. And I work with organizations all over the world to help them develop their leaders. And as a part of my work there is I've written 3 books. Success Mindsets was my first one. The Elevated Leader was my second one. And my new book coming out is called Becoming Better.
I love that. So talk to us a little bit about why you got into this field and kind of how you got there. So even before you were a professor at Cal State Fullerton, which blows my mind that you have that large of a business school. I went to Cal State Long Beach. Sorry, everybody. Anyone that's a Cal State Fullerton alumni. And I know that they are pretty big on business, but I didn't realize it was for Fullerton. So before you got there, before you became a professor, what was your journey that landed you into the personal and professional development space?
Yeah, well, I actually kind of fell in love with this space as a senior in high school. I took a class that I'm not sure is offered at any other high school. I assume it is somewhere, but the class was sports psychology.
Oh.
And I played basketball in high school, and so I was required to read 3 books. So I read books by famous college basketball coaches like Mike Krzyzewski. And I remember as a senior in high school thinking, man, if I could write books like this for a career, that would be my dream job.
Yeah.
And I had no clue how to do it. And so fast forward a few years, I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, and I met a Harvard Business School professor. And I asked him, what do you teach? And he said, organizational behavior. And I said, well, what's that? And I don't remember his exact answer, but I remember what the thought that popped in my head, which was, oh my goodness, this is sports psychology, but for business. And so from there, I kind of felt like I found my home, and that's what I wanted to pursue. So I ended up graduating from college, and then I entered a PhD program at Indiana University in organizational behavior and human resource. And I ended up doing my dissertation on leadership. And that was great because it allowed me to review the last 70 years of leadership research. And my primary takeaway from that actually didn't sit very well with. So what I come to learn and observe is that the vast majority of leadership research primarily focuses on answering one question. And that question is, what do leaders need to do to be effective and successful? And that's led to some good answers. And it's not a terrible question, but for me, it feels short-sighted because I've always felt that leadership is not about just doing certain things. It's about being a certain type of person. And so when I graduated from Indiana University, got the job at Cal State Fullerton, that's when I decided I'm going to try my best to tap into this idea of what is the being side of leadership and how do we help leaders to become? And that's what's ultimately fueled my research, my book writing, and then the consulting that I do.
Yeah, I love what you just said because ultimately, and we talk about this here at Rise Up For You, is that the person is the professional and the professional is the person. And so just like you're saying, when it comes to leadership, it's really all in the same. It's like, how do you live your life when no one's watching, right? And is that in an alignment when you're in the workplace, when you're in the community? Because again, it's all connected. I'm curious for you. I know you have a new book coming out and I want to talk about that. But when you're working with leaders, what do you see is the biggest gap right now? Like currently in this year, there's a lot that's happening. There's a lot that's happened in the last decade. Like, what is the big challenge that you're finding?
Well, and this is for me, and this is the crux of my new book, is I think it's really helpful for us to understand that there's two different sides of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
One side of ourselves is what I call our doing side, and that's our talent, our knowledge, our skills, and our abilities.
Yeah.
And the reality is that most of the leaders that I meet have the talent, knowledge, skills, and abilities to be successful. But that doesn't mean that they are successful. And the reason why says more about a second side of themselves, which is their being side. And our being side is more akin to our character, our psyche, our mindsets, our consciousness, and really our level of emotional control.
Yeah.
And so when I work with leaders, what I find is that they are generally have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do what they need to do. But they generally lack the being side, the cognitive and emotional control and sophistication to be able to employ their talent, knowledge, skills, and abilities. I think we can dive into that, but let me see if that makes sense to you or if you want to fill in any gaps there.
Yeah, I mean, you're right in alignment with Rise for You. So essentially what I hear you saying is the hard skills really versus the soft skills. And research is showing that about 80% of an individual's success is determined by their soft skills, which is, the emotional and social intelligence, their self-confidence, their ability to regulate themselves, to be conscious of themselves on a day-to-day basis, how they play with others, I say, like in the sandbox. And a lot of times as, not even just as leaders, as people, we forget that these soft skills really make up the majority of our success, that we can have as many degrees as we want. We can be super technically advanced, but if we don't know how to build relationships and manage ourselves and take care of our own well-being, then our success will be hindered and limited.
For sure. So here's what I've learned is that our altitude along our being side sets the ceiling for the groups and the organizations that we lead. We can't expect a group or an organization to operate at a more sophisticated level than what we operate at. What research has found, particularly on leaders, well, actually, let me get back. So the research has looked at the population as a whole and what our altitude is along our being side. In fact, they found that there's 3 different levels of being. And what they found across all people is that 64% of people operate at a base level of being, 35% get to a second level, and only 1% get to the third level.
Can you break down the 3 levels for us?
Yeah, for sure. So these levels range at the bottom or lower end is when our body is wired more for self-protection.
Okay.
And then as we move towards the higher end, our body becomes more wired for value creation. So you're going to see that as I step into these levels. So
I was just going to ask you, because when I know you're going to explain it, but what I hear is, or I guess what I visualize is Maslow's hierarchy. So it's like kind of the bottom of the pyramid, which is, basic needs, functioning, support. And then as we get to the top, it's like self-actualization, right? Like the more enlightened point of the pyramid.
Yes. In fact, these 3 levels were inspired by Maslow's thinking. It's not directly connected, but definitely inspired by Maslow's thinking. So the base level is when our body is wired for safety, comfort, and belonging.
Okay.
And so when we're in this level, we want to join with groups that help us to feel safe, comfortable, and like we belong. And when we join these groups, we don't step in and say, hey, I want to lead. We say, I don't want to lead, but if you tell me what to do, I will do it, provided you keep me safe, comfortable, and feeling like I belong.
Yeah.
So that's where 64% of all adults tend to operate, is at that level. So that's the first level. The second level is our body's needs change. So there's an upgrade that occurs. We are now become wired to stand out, advance, and get ahead. So now we're willing to actually be unsafe, uncomfortable, and not belong in order for us to stand out, advance, and get ahead. And so while 35% of people operate here, what the research on leaders has found is that 85% of leaders operate here.
Okay.
That most leaders are wired to operate in a manner in which they are recognized for hitting certain milestones in the short term. And so they're very much focused on what are the results, what are the outcomes, how can I win, how can I advance, how can I get ahead. And that's where we find most leaders there. And as we shift from that first level to the second level, we shift from being a dependent thinker to being an independent.
Okay.
And that's the second level then. The third level is we've got another dramatic shift in our internal operating system and the needs we're wired to fulfill. So at the first level, we're wired to stand in. At the second level, we're wired to stand out. Well, in the third level, we don't care about standing in and we don't care about standing out. We care about creating value for others. So we want to lift others, create value for others, and help us ensure that the groups or the people that we're leading are focused on fulfilling a purpose that's bigger than ourselves. And when we operate and get to this level, we shift from being an independent thinker, that's the second level, to at that third level becoming an interdependent thinker. And so one of the benefits of these upgrades is we shift up, we also become a more complex and regulated being. And I think that that's one of the challenges that I'm seeing, going back to the question you asked earlier, is what challenges am I seeing with leaders? Well, I'm seeing that the complexity of the leader's world oftentimes is exceeding the personal complexity of the leader. And when that happens, leaders struggle to navigate effectively amidst that complexity. And the reality is that our world's complexity isn't going to drop. I mean, we've just seen what's gone on in our world over the last 4 months, and it has just grown increasingly complex. And if we want to be able to navigate, our only option is for us to level up ourselves. And again, it's not improving in our knowledge and our skills, it's upgrading our own internal operating system, or this, what I'm calling our being side.
Well, because it's really important. And what I hear you saying is moving from a transactional standpoint as a leader, which I would say is that kind of that second level, to that transformational level, where it's like, I am helping the person or client or stakeholder, whoever it is, go into a place where they feel transformed or they're feeling empowered to then go on and pay it forward, right? And that's I would say the highest level of leadership. So tell us a little bit about your new book, and then because I want to dive into just, if you can give us a little sneak peek of 1 or 2 points, but I think it's really, really important that we talk about it because of, again, the person is the professional and the professional is the person, and they don't live in isolation.
Yeah. The book is all about these two sides, the doing side and the being side. And here's what I've learned is we are quite connected to our doing side. Most of us understand our doing side, and we know how to improve along our doing side.
We're attached to it too.
For sure. But what I also find is most people are not aware or attached to their being side. And so that's ultimately the purpose of my book. It's to help people understand they do have a being side. I want to help them to evaluate the quality along their being side. So there's some self-assessments that go into that. And then how do we go about elevating along our being side? And what I've learned is that when we improve along our doing side, that can be helpful, but it generally is only incrementally helpful. But if we can elevate along our being side, that's transformational. And that's ultimately, if we want to step into a better version of ourselves, our more ideal self, that's the side that we need to focus on. And it's just the side that most people are least familiar with.
Yeah. And I would also say, because we use a similar analogy at Rise Up For You called micro versus macro when we're talking about self-confidence, right? The micro confidence is the external things that you build over your time, right? The certifications, the degrees, like you said, the doing, but it's really the macro self-confidence that you need. It's like that inner belief, the inner drive, the growth mindset. And correct me if I'm wrong or if you have a different opinion, but we come from the belief that when you can build that macro or the being in your own words, then you will create more doing, right? Like you have the capacity to learn more micro skills, or you have the capacity to create more doing because the being side has been nurtured. You're taking care of it. You're growing. You've built your capacity and your mindset to see things differently, to take on things differently.
Yes. No, I love that. And we're spot on. And I'll use we're just going to split hairs on different analogies. So let me throw in another analogy that I think makes this come to life is when we improve along our doing side, that's like putting tools into our tool belt.
Yeah.
And the reality is that each of us has some tools that are probably more sophisticated than what we can deal with, right? We've gone to school, we've gotten certain degrees, we've gotten certain skills that we've developed. But then the question is, can we employ those in these high pressure or stressful or complex situations?
Yeah.
And most people can't. And that's where this being side development is rather than focus on adding tools to our tool belt, let's focus on the person wearing the tool belt. And when we can elevate that person wearing the tool belt, they could do a much better job of employing the various tools on their tool belt. So I think that's just another way of saying what you said.
I love it. In your book, what would you say is like one golden nugget or something that you can share from the book beyond what you've already said? Like maybe the first step, right? We want them, everyone that's listening, we want to make sure you grab the book when it releases. We'll make sure we put the launch date in the notes. But what's one thing that you would say, okay, start this today?
Well, so I'm going to go deeper than that, if that's okay. Because yes, there are starting starting points. But what we need to understand is that being side development is very much connected to our body's nervous system and our capacity to regulate our body's nervous system. So if we want to elevate along our being side, we need to do certain things that actually help to heal our body's nervous system. So this is one of the most meaningful aspects about this work for me is I've come to learn that the more trauma somebody has experienced in their life, the more their body becomes wired for self-protection and kind of move down on that being side. And I'm somebody who has trauma in my background, and I've kind of had to learn this the hard way. But at the end of the day, this being side work is ultimately about healing our minds, our bodies, and our hearts. And it's only when we could do that we transformationally step into really who we're meant to be.
Yeah. So it's not easy work, what I hear you saying.
So I'm never going to say it's easy, but I'm going to say it's easier than we generally think.
Yeah.
So I think there are, to your point, there are certain level starter strategies. And this is what I talk about in my book. There's some starter level strategies. These are things like meditation, for example, is a tool that everybody should use to help us to refine our body's nervous system.
Journaling,
Journaling is another one. Yeah. And so an example that I use in my book, I don't know if you've read his book, but David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me.
Yeah,
I think it's just chock full of these starter level strategies, and which include meditation, gratitude, journaling. Even his next book, Never Finished, he records himself, things like that. The next level, so there's starter level strategies, then there's deeper level strategies. And I think that these deeper level strategies revolve connecting with and becoming aware of our mindsets.
Yes.
The mental lenses that we use to view the world around us. And so I've got a framework that I use. In fact, I've got a free assessment on my webpage at ryangottfredson.com that people can use to awaken to the quality of their mindset. And so that's at a deeper level. And then at the deepest level is this is a place where some of us might need, myself included, need some therapeutic or professional work. So this is where certain therapy modalities come in, like EMDR, neurofeedback therapy, even kind of been following the research on psychedelic assisted therapy.
Yeah, me too.
And the role that it plays in this space and on our being side. And so I don't think that's the place to start, but there's some of us who were getting to that level can be deeply transformational.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. This work is not easy, but you got to be willing to put your feet to the fire because there are going to be some things that pop up for you, especially if you're at that level 2 and 3. In order to create the transformation in yourself, you have to be willing to look at yourself in the mirror, go back into your past, your belief system, like why you are the way you are, how you became who you are. And that's not always easy for people. In fact, I would say that most people kind of want to leave that alone, right? Like they don't want to bring up things from the past. They want to leave it where it's at, not recognizing that in some ways you need to bring it up and reconcile with it in order to move into a transformational, holistic place as a person.
Yeah, let me give you an example of this. So I was working with a CEO a couple of years ago, and the CEO is the founder of this business. By all terms of kind of metrics, it's been a really successful business. I mean, they doubled in growth from 500 employees to 1,000 employees in the year prior to me working with them. And so I met with the CEO and talking to him about the success of his organization. And I asked him the question, what led you to start your business? And his answer I felt like was revealing. His answer was to prove others wrong.
Yeah.
And that was a huge drive for them. But you kind of sense, right, that where that drive comes from is not an optimal place.
Right.
And while the company has been successful by kind of financial metrics, if you interviewed his executive team at the time, you would come to find that his executive team was burned out. They were being micromanaged by this leader. And at the end of the day, they were only there because of how they were compensated and not because of the social or cultural factor. And that was, I think, in order for that leader to be able to lead in a manner that is engaging as opposed to almost harmful, is he himself has got to wrestle with that underlying moment or the hurt that comes with this need to prove others wrong. And until he heals that, he's going to continue to show up as a leader that micromanage and that ultimately burns his people out.
Yeah. And I think going back to your languaging around the being and the doing, he's really only leading leading in his career, right? Like that's the place, I guess we can say from a metric standpoint, was thriving, but we don't know if he's really built success when it comes to, like his romantic relationships, his family, his community. I mean, there's all these other levels that particular mindset could be hurting him in a different way, right? And so I think that really understanding how these skills, the soft skills, right, the being skills interplay in every aspect of your life so that you can build a life where you can truly have it all as a leader. And I think that's the greatest level of leadership, is being able to lead not only in the workplace, but in your personal life as well. In every aspect, like your personal leadership, you're building something, a life where you can have it all, I like to say.
Yeah.
Right.
So let me add to that, because here's what I've learned is that as people elevate along their being side, they increase their capacity to spin more plates.
Yes.
And spin more plates effectively.
Yes.
And that's, so at the end of the day, I mean, that's when we're finding leaders that are feeling burned out, like, oh my goodness, I'm having to juggle too many balls. What they're actually feeling and what they're revealing is that their being side altitude is not yet what it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate having you on the show. I'd love to jump into the power section of the interview today. So I'm just going to ask you some rapid fire questions. The first one is, obviously we talk a lot about emotional and social intelligence here with Rise Up. For you, it's our core pillar. So if you had to say, what's one thing that makes you emotional or cry like on demand?
Oh. Yeah, I think honestly, like what comes to my mind, and maybe this is the last time I remember crying, was actually watching the movie Moana with my children.
Aww.
And I think what was moving about that to me was this idea when people go in a courageous search for really trying to better, they're stepping out beyond what most people would normally be willing to do. When they're willing to do that for the betterment of others, I find that just really inspiring. And then when you add in some pretty inspirational music, it gets to me, pulls at those heartstrings.
I love that. And if you can leave the world with one final message, we call it our golden nugget, what would that be for you, Ryan?
Well, I think we've touched on it, which is this idea that if we want to become the best version of ourselves, it is all about ultimately healing ourselves.
Yeah.
And I hope that our conversation can inspire those listening to seek greater healing. We could all use it, myself included.
Yeah, I love that. And I have one more question for you. But before I ask, tell us where we can find you, your website, social media, LinkedIn. Obviously, we want to make sure that everyone listening can connect with you.
Yeah, would love to connect with anybody. Website is ryangottfredson.com. And then if people want to follow me on social media, I'm most active on LinkedIn and would love to connect there.
Fantastic. And final question, as you know, we're the company Rise Up for You. What comes to mind for you when you hear that phrase?
It's just, I love the language because it's all about elevating. Because when we can elevate ourselves, we can elevate the world around us. And I love that message and I love that idea. It inspires me to get up in the morning, not only because I want to have a greater positive impact on the world, but I want to empower others to do the same. And I think you feel the same way.
Absolutely. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you everyone for joining the Rise Up For You podcast. Again, this is your host, Lena Nasserdeen. Every single week, we are bringing amazing executives, entrepreneurs, thought leaders from around the world to help you be your absolute best. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Thanks again, Ryan.
Thank you.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Before you leave, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel and check us out on social media. We are everywhere, from LinkedIn to Instagram to Facebook, at our simple handle @Rise Up For You. On every single platform, it's exactly the same. And we're providing new content on every single platform, so there's something different everywhere. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel, subscribe to our podcast, and connect with us on social media. I'll see you next time.